Endpoint creation and management for Metalogic's storage point. Primary and backup endpoints are simply the storage location for your blobs. Once you have created and configured endpoints, you will add them to profiles, which serve as the mechanism for externalizing blob data to endpoints. New blobs are created when content is added or edited in SharePoint. As SharePoint creates these blobs, they will be sent from the web front-end server to either the storage point endpoint or to the content database. As blobs are sent to an endpoint, another copy of that blob is also sent to what's called a backup endpoint. This ensures you will always have a backup copy of blobs that are in the primary endpoint. Backup endpoints will actually retain blobs that have been deleted from SharePoint for 180 days by default. If anything happens to blobs that are in the primary endpoint, like corruption or deletion, the Blob Health Analyzer job will discover the issue and restore the missing blobs back to the primary endpoint. Additionally, this backup endpoint is used by the Metalogic SharePoint Backup product. During a restore operation, if a blob is no longer in the primary endpoint, the restore operation will retrieve that blob from the backup endpoint. As you create endpoints, some things are very important to keep in mind. 1. Multiple primary endpoints can exist, but there can only be one backup endpoint. Secondly, endpoints cannot be shared across farms. If you have two farms that are both using storage point, they must be pointing to their own separate blob store. This is because if you delete content from one farm, it does not mean you meant to delete it from the other farm as well. This is why, when migrating, it's a best practice to make a copy of your blobs for the destination farm first, before the migration begins. Alternatively, you can use Content Matrix, which has direct integration with the storage point product. Let's begin creating and editing endpoints. Navigate to Central Admin and click on Storage and Backup Endpoints. If you do not have any endpoints to edit, click on Create a New Endpoint. If you have an endpoint to edit, click on that endpoint. Must give it a name and tell StoragePoint whether it will be the primary or the backup endpoint. Endpoints can be taken offline and put in read-only mode at any point. Existing blob data will always be read from the endpoint, but any new blob data will be sent to either a new endpoint or back to the content database. Choose the storage location of your endpoint. For the purposes of this recording, we're going to create an endpoint on a file system. For configuration of any non-file system endpoints, please consult the guide for the particular storage device or cloud location that you want to connect to. Enter the network location for where you'd like to store your blobs. Expanding the advanced settings for this adapter, you will see quite a few options for how we delete your content. Once data is deleted from SharePoint, you'll be able to decide how you want to have that data deleted from the blob store. Simply auditing the deletion will actually just change the file name. Normal deletion will send it to the server's recycle bin, and shredding will do a secure deletion where we actually zero out the bits on the disk. Buffer size is the amount of temp space we will need while we move data to the endpoint. You rarely need to change this and will only do so if support tells you to. Certain regulations require that metadata be backed up separately. In order to meet these regulations, switch the support for metadata to true. This will send an XML file to the endpoint that contains all the document's metadata, along with the blob itself. Scroll down and let's continue to review the rest of the settings. Tell StoragePoint if your device is a worm device. A worm device is a write once, read many device. If set to yes, StoragePoint will never delete the blobs that are stored on this endpoint. When the orphan blob endpoint jobs runs across endpoints that are defined as worm devices, you will see a report that says that these blobs have been completely skipped and are not being deleted even though they have been removed from SharePoint. Below that, we have some advanced settings on how we folder the blobs in the endpoint itself. As you can see, you can create a folder scheme that shows the year, month, date, hour, minute, and even seconds that these blobs were externalized. Key to StoragePoint is its compression and encryption algorithms. When creating a new endpoint, you can define that you have compression turned on as well as encryption. Encryption can be set to 128 AES bit encryption or to 256 AES bit encryption. Once an endpoint is created, you cannot change the compression or the encryption algorithms. Monitoring and getting notified of any issues on your endpoints is going to be key to a successful deployment. Ensure a warning notification is delivered when StoragePoint encounters a certain number of successive errors in a row. Also make sure you generate an error when you are about to run out of space on this endpoint. Endpoints can also automatically be taken offline when these errors occur, as well as when you're about to run out of space. Ensure these notifications are sent to your default administrators, and any other additional administrators or users who need to be notified can be added to the additional contacts. When finished, simply click Save. Once you've determined the ideal way to configure your endpoints for your business, you may go back and create as many endpoints as you like. As you can see here, I've created multiple endpoints for different tiers of storage in my environment. Be sure that you also create backup endpoints. You will only need one backup endpoint per profile that you create. Profile creation will be reviewed in a different class. Now that you know how to properly configure an endpoint, go back to Applications Management and click on Default Values. These are the default values for your endpoints. This will save you a lot of time when creating endpoints through our UI, or if other administrators are creating endpoints as well and you want to ensure that all endpoints have the same settings. For those power users, all of these settings are actually exposed through our PowerShell API as well. Especially important is this top setting, the default notification contacts. As we saw on the previous screen when we were creating an endpoint, these are the users that will be notified of any issues that are occurring within StoragePoint.